Starting off our list of Brian Griffin's 10 worst moments ever, we got an episode that's not just embarrassing, but downright irresponsible. Herpes the Love Sore. This episode is a prime example of how Brian's lack of judgment can create a mess for everyone involved. It all kicks off when Brian and Stewie are watching a classic Western on TV. In the show, two characters become blood brothers, an act meant to symbolize trust and an unbreakable bond. But leave it to Stewie to take this as inspiration for his own life. He decides that he and Brian should become blood brothers too. What could go wrong, right?
Yes, let's do that. Brian, I want you inside me.
Stewie's enthusiasm is as awkward as ever, but instead of stopping to think, Brian just goes along with it. They go through the ritual, mixing their blood, and everything seems perfectly fine at first, but we all know Brian, and fine never lasts long with him. The next morning, Stewie wakes up to find a nasty surprise, a huge, ugly sore on his lip. Naturally, he's horrified. He confronts Brian, demanding to know what's happening. That's when Brian casually drops the bomb. He's had herpes all along and didn't think it was worth mentioning before they swapped blood. Way to go, Brian. Brian tries to downplay the whole situation, even going so far as to suggest that herpes would be less gross if it had a cuter name, like Boppo. But Stewie isn't having any of it. He's now stuck with a visible and lifelong reminder of Brian's carelessness, just when he's supposed to be helping out with wedding invitations.
Relax, it's not that big a deal.
Not that big a deal! It's a disgusting, unsightly, unsavory disease, and it lasts for life!
Stewie's anger is totally justified. But things get even worse when Chris reveals that he's also got herpes, thanks to Brian. Now, the whole Griffin household is infected, and it's all because of one careless act, but Stewie and Chris aren't about to let Brian off the hook. Before they get their revenge, though, they see Brian out on a date. Chris, ever the opportunist, decides to ruin Brian's night.
Wow, you must be such a good person to knowingly go out with a herpes-riddled dirtbag.
Brian's date runs off, leaving him humiliated in public. But that's just the beginning. When they get home, Stewie and Chris hack into Brian's Facebook account, changing his profile picture and making sure everyone knows how much of a mess Brian's life has become. Finally, Brian realizes just how badly he's screwed up. He apologizes to Stewie, admitting that he was too embarrassed to tell him the truth. Stewie forgives him, but it's clear that things will never be quite the same between them. And that's why this episode kicks off our countdown of Brian Griffin's worst moments. It's a prime example of how Brian's careless decisions can cause chaos for everyone around him. Coming in at number 9 on our list of Brian Griffin's 10 worst moments ever is a truly cringeworthy episode, Quagmire's Dad. This one's a wild ride with awkward moments, unexpected twists, and one of Brian's biggest mistakes. The episode starts with Brian heading out for a seminar on creating a web-based series. He's excited and ready to go, but the Griffins barely react. Lois just casually wishes him luck, and Brian leaves feeling a bit unappreciated. Meanwhile, Quagmire has some big news. His dad, Dan Quagmire, a war hero, is coming to visit. Quagmire is super proud of his dad and tells Peter, Joe, and Cleveland all about the amazing things Dan did in Vietnam.
Anyway, the Navy is honoring him at this year's Naval Ball for all his bravery in Vietnam.
Wow, you must be proud.
Sure am. He was like a hero to me when I was growing up.
When the guys visit Quagmire's house to meet Dan, things get weird fast. Instead of a grand entrance, Dan walks in dancing to "These Boots Are Made for Walking." The guys are left wondering what's going on. Peter starts getting suspicious. As Dan orders a Cosmopolitan, Peter and Cleveland text each other. Peter accidentally sends "So ducking gay."
Oh, sorry, that's my auto spell correct, but yeah, he's super gay.
Peter rushes home to tell his family that Quagmire's dad is gay. The family isn't sure if he's right, but Peter is convinced. The next day, Peter visits Quagmire and tells him, "Your dad's gay." Quagmire is shocked and denies it, saying,
You're jealous!
Huh?
Yeah, your father's a drunk and mine's a hero. Look,
To prove Peter wrong, Quagmire takes the guys to a military event where Dan is being honored. Quagmire's proud, but Peter notices the odd comments from Dan's old buddies. They talk about Dan's bravery, but mention semen a little too much for Peter's comfort.
Seaman. Say, Quagmire, I told you he's gay.
shut up!
Finally, Quagmire confronts his dad and asks if he's gay.
Oh, Glenn, I'm not gay. But I am a woman trapped in a man's body. And while I'm in Quahog, I plan to have a sex change operation.
Oh, come on, just be gay.
After Quagmire learns that his dad, Dan, is planning to have a sex change operation, he goes over to Peter's house to share the news. Quagmire is clearly struggling with this revelation and isn't sure how to handle it. He explains that his dad will be undergoing the surgery soon. Instead of offering support, Peter makes an inappropriate joke. He suggests that they bring home whatever parts are removed during the surgery for Brian. When the day of the surgery arrives, Quagmire and Peter go to the hospital together. This is a huge moment for Quagmire as he's about to see his dad go through a life-changing procedure. Peter, despite his earlier joke, seems to realize the gravity of the situation now. Both of them are nervous as they wait to see how the surgery turns out. Finally, the surgery is over and Dan emerges as Ida, having fully transitioned into a woman. This is the moment where Quagmire sees his dad in a completely new light.
What do you think, boys?
Quagmire brings his newly transitioned dad, Ida, to dinner at the Griffins, hoping for a smooth evening. But Peter, being his usual inappropriate self, starts asking very personal and insensitive questions.
So, Ida, you miss your penis?
This is, of course, an incredibly rude and insensitive thing to ask someone who has just undergone gender confirmation surgery. The question is cringeworthy and shows Peter's complete lack of awareness about how hurtful his words can be. Quagmire is understandably upset by Peter's behavior. He came to the dinner hoping to help Ida feel accepted and supported, but instead Peter's thoughtless comments make the situation even more uncomfortable. Quagmire is deeply offended by Peter's lack of respect for his dad's feelings and the seriousness of the situation. Unable to take any more of Peter's inappropriate questions, Quagmire decides to leave the dinner early, feeling disgusted and disappointed. After dinner, Quagmire talks to Ida and admits he's having a hard time accepting the change. Ida tries to comfort him, but Quagmire is clearly struggling. Feeling hurt, Ida leaves. So after all the drama with Quagmire's dad, Brian is finally on his way home from that super exciting seminar about web series or whatever. But instead of heading straight home, he decides to stop by a bar because, well, that's what Brian does best, drink and chat up women. And guess what? Tonight is his lucky night. He spots this beautiful woman at the bar, and of course, being the suave dog that he is, he makes his move. They hit it off instantly. There's some flirty banter, a few laughs, and before you know it, they're making out like it's the last call at a college party. Brian's feeling on top of the world. Finally, a classy lady who gets him. He's thinking this might just be the start of something special. So, they order another round to keep the good vibes going.
Brian. Ida. 2 more, please.
The next morning, Brian tells Peter and Lois about the amazing woman he met and shows them a picture. Instead of being impressed, they burst into laughter. Brian, confused, walks away. Later, Brian starts telling Stewie all about his amazing seminar and the incredible woman he met at the bar. He's all smug, probably thinking he's just scored the jackpot. But then, Stewie, being Stewie, casually drops the mother of all bombshells. Oh, by the way, Quagmire's dad had a sex change and is now called Ida. And just like that, Brian's world comes crashing down. The realization hits him like a freight train. He suddenly pieces it all together, and the mental image of his romantic evening takes a sharp, horrifying turn. His stomach flips, and he starts puking like he's just downed a gallon of bad milk. Meanwhile, over at Quagmire's place, Ida is all smiles. She tells Quagmire she's met someone really special. She's practically glowing as she says, "His name is Brian, and I think he's really special." Quagmire's reaction, pure horror. He screams to the heavens, "No, no, why, God, why?" It's like the universe just played the cruelest joke on him, and now all he can think about is hunting down Brian. Fueled by rage, and probably a lot of denial, Quagmire storms into the Griffin's house and pummels Brian, who doesn't even try to defend himself. He knows he's messed up big time. After taking a well-deserved beating, Brian, barely able to speak, looks up and drops one final bomb.
Your dad.
And with that, the episode ends, leaving Quagmire fuming and everyone else in shock. Classic Brian, even when he's down, he still knows how to get the last word in. Coming in at number 8 on our list of Brian's most epic fails, we have an episode that really shows off Brian's talent for being the absolute worst. Yep, it's time for Brian the Closer, where Brian proves that no good deed goes unpunished, especially when he's the one holding the leash. So the episode kicks off with Peter and Brian just chilling on the couch, you know, the usual. But then, bam! Peter realizes he's been sitting on Brian's favorite chew rope all along. Now, for those of you who might not know, Brian is actually a dog. Yeah, shocking, right? So he gets all excited about this gross, slobbery rope. But because Peter is Peter, he decides he wants it too. Because why not? It's not like he knows what he'll do with it, but if Brian wants it, it must be good.
Sometimes I just bite it like this.
Rope! That's stupid. I want it.
And here we go. Peter starts obsessing over this dumb rope like it's the last Twinkie in the apocalypse. But instead of just asking nicely or, leaving the poor dog alone, Peter goes full Gollum. And trust me, once you see Peter hissing like he's auditioning for Lord of the Rings, the Couch Edition, you'll never look at him the same way again. I mean, seriously, Gollum's got nothing on this guy.
I don't like what it's doing to him.
Precious. Once a precious rope.
So naturally, Peter decides the best way to get the rope is to tie Brian to the back of his car and drive away. Yeah, because that's exactly what a normal person would do. Surprise, surprise, Brian ends up with his face smashed up so badly, he could pass for an extra in a horror movie. But does the family feel bad for him? Nah, not really. Instead, they just awkwardly try not to look directly at the half-melted face hanging off his skull. What a supportive bunch.
You gotta take me to the dentist to get my mouth fixed.
Brian, we can try to make you feel a little less repulsive, but we're not spending human money on a deformed animal.
Brian, now looking like a rejected Halloween mask, does what anyone would do. He heads to the Drunken Clam to drown his sorrows. There he runs into Quagmire, who's usually the last person you'd expect to help Brian, considering the whole dating his dad thing. But even Quagmire can't watch Brian suffer like this. So in a rare moment of kindness, he offers to hook Brian up with his dentist. And what a deal it is. It's like one of those too good to be true infomercials, only sleazier.
That's my dentist. He'll bill me. I've got an account.
You got an account with a dentist?
He sells me nitrous at wholesale. I bang his wife.
Brian heads to the dentist and voila! He comes back looking like a Hollywood heartthrob with a brand new set of teeth. Suddenly, everyone's in love with his smile. Even Lois is swooning over him, which, let's be real, is a little weird. But hey, it's Family Guy, so we just roll with it. Brian's new smile is so powerful, it lands him a gig as a real estate agent. Apparently, selling houses is as easy as smiling and saying, "Buy this or I'll keep smiling at you."
Look at that smile. You're a born salesman. You should come work for me.
Brian takes the job and starts selling houses like hotcakes, charming every single person in Quahog. He's like the Pied Piper of bad real estate deals. But then his boss throws him a challenge. Sell a crap hole of a condo that nobody wants. And Brian, because he's flying high on his own ego, takes the challenge without even thinking twice. I mean, why wouldn't he? He's basically been on a winning streak of terrible decisions.
The only thing is, anyone can sell a nice house, but a real star is someone who can sell a dump.
I can sell anything.
Now here's where it gets really bad. Brian needs to find someone dumb enough to buy this dump, and who does he set his sights on? Quagmire, the one guy who actually helped him out when he was in a bind. Yep, Brian's about to throw Quagmire under the bus and back it up a few times for good measure. Quagmire, thinking Brian's his friend, falls for it hook, line, and sinker.
For the first time in my life, I got money to burn.
Looks like I found my sucker.
Brian pulls out all the stops to convince Quagmire that this rundown condo is a dream come true. He even shows him a misleading ad that makes the place look like it's straight out of a luxury magazine. And Peter? Oh, Peter's completely sold, probably because there's a pool on the ceiling. Yeah, you heard that right.
The ceiling is a pool. The ceiling is a pool. Quagmire, you gotta get this.
But Quagmire isn't totally convinced. He's not about to drop his hard-earned cash without seeing the place first. So what does Brian do? He plays the ultimate mind game. He tells Quagmire that the place is about to be snatched up by a rival pilot. Quagmire, of course, can't let that happen and buys the condo on the spot. What could possibly go wrong?
Wait. Okay, I'll take it.
All right, you won't be sorry.
Cut to the big reveal. Quagmire finally sees the condo, and it's even worse than you'd imagine. It's like someone took the worst parts of a crack house and slapped on a for sale sign. But Peter, bless his clueless heart, is still optimistic. Meanwhile, Quagmire realizes he's been duped and is ready to rip Brian apart, literally. They find out they have 72 hours to cancel the deal, but Brian's gone full Houdini, disappearing before Quagmire can track him down.
They're gone.
Well, for the next 72 hours, I'm gonna be harder to find than a nice cat.
Brian hides out in a seedy motel, thinking he's safe from Quagmire. But, of course, Quagmire finds him because Brian's not exactly the master of stealth. When Quagmire confronts him, Brian does what he does best. He fake apologizes while secretly counting down the minutes until the 72 hours are up. And then, just as Quagmire's about to punch him in the face, Brian gleefully announces that time's up and the deal is done. Yeah, Brian's that kind of guy.
You're honest and direct and compassionate.
And that is 72 hours. Enjoy your crap hole, dumbass.
You son of a bitch!
So there you have it. Brian screws over Quagmire, and he does it with a smile. Literally. This episode is proof that Brian is the kind of friend who will stab you in the back, take your money, and laugh about it afterward. It's not just one of his worst moments, it's a masterclass in being a terrible friend. Bravo, Brian, you've really outdone yourself this time. So coming in at number 7 on Brian's worst moments ever, we have a time when Brian, our favorite talking dog, actually finishes writing something. I know, shocking, right? In the episode, Brian's Play. Brian writes a whole play. Yes, a whole play. And he even gets the Griffin family to come to see it at the theater. Now you know it's gotta be a big deal if the whole family is dragged into it.
Remember, kids, if it's terrible, at the end we all say, "You did it."
Even Peter is ready for whatever might happen. When he asks Brian if there's going to be an intermission, he's holding an empty Gatorade bottle. And let's not kid ourselves, Peter's definitely planning to do something gross with that bottle. But let's move on. So the play finally ends after what feels like forever. And guess what? Everyone actually loves it. I mean, really? Are we in some kind of alternate reality? Even Peter, who usually couldn't care less about anything remotely smart, is praising it.
Wow, that was amazing.
I mean, usually the shows suck in this town.
The next day at breakfast, Brian is on top of the world. He reads the reviews of his play, and they're all super positive. Brian thinks he's finally made it. And get this, his success even inspires little Stewie to write his own play. But of course, Brian has to be all patronizing and treat Stewie like he's just playing pretend.
I want to write a play.
Oh, that's cute, Stewie. Maybe someday.
No, I'm gonna write a play.
Fast forward a bit, and surprise, surprise, Stewie actually writes his own play. Meanwhile, Brian is whining about how busy he is with all his fame. Yeah, Brian, we totally believe you. You're super busy being famous, right? Anyway, Stewie asks Brian if he'll read his play, and Brian says yes, but not before going on and on about how he's got no time for anything. How Stewie puts up with him is beyond me. Later, after hanging out at the Clam, Brian finally reads Stewie's play, and let me tell you, his reaction is priceless.
My God. It's miraculous.
So, Brian's totally blown away by Stewie's play. It's like mind-blowingly good, and he's freaking out because it's way better than his own. So what does Brian do? He calls up his cousin Jasper, and Jasper gives him some seriously bad advice. And what does Brian do? Instead of being a good friend, he goes along with it and totally lies to Stewie's face, telling him that his play is terrible. What a jerk move, right? But it gets worse. That night, Brian sneaks into Stewie's room and steals his play, so Stewie can't send it to the theater company. And then things get really weird.
Hey,
Who the hell are you?
I'm the guy Stewie pays to watch him sleep. Who are you?
Yeah, you heard that right. Stewie pays some random creepy dude to watch him sleep. But back to Brian. When Stewie confronts him, Brian tries everything to get out of it, but come on, this is Stewie. Stewie knows exactly what's going on. He even found his script buried in the backyard. Classic Brian move. And Stewie doesn't hold back. He tells Brian straight up how much his play sucked. Honestly, if Peter and Chris liked it, that should have been a red flag right there.
I knew my play was good, just like I knew your play was a mediocre patchwork of hackneyed ideas and tired cliches.
And then Stewie goes full savage on Brian. He rips into him, calling his play a pile of cliches and basically telling him he's a terrible writer. We're all just sitting here like, go Stewie, because Brian totally deserves it.
May every person that laughs at your sophomoric effort be a reminder of your eternal mediocrity and pierce your heart like a knife.
Okay, maybe that was a little harsh, but still, you've got to admit, Stewie nailed it. Brian, totally crushed, runs outside to cry, and in classic Brian fashion, he accidentally kills a squirrel. Seriously, Brian, you're just a walking disaster at this point.
And I'm sorry. But nobody can ever know that.
But the drama isn't over yet. Stewie convinces Brian to come with him to the big premiere of his play on Broadway. After coming up with a million excuses, Brian finally agrees to go. But once they get there, things go south real fast. Brian starts bragging to everyone about how he's a playwright. Like, dude, you're in a room full of actual playwrights. Read the room. And just when you think it can't get any worse, Brian finds out that these playwrights saw his play and thought it was so bad. They're still laughing about it. Ouch.
I had heard only good things.
It was a piece of on a.
At this point, Brian is beyond embarrassed. Outside the theater, he finally confesses to Stewie that he just wanted a few years to feel successful before everyone realized he was just mediocre. And yeah, we feel a little bad for him. Just a little. But then we remember that he tried to sabotage Stewie, so, karma. Stewie, being the surprisingly nice baby that he is, decides to stay with Brian and cheer him up. It's one of those rare, sweet moments between them that makes you go, "Aw." Later, at the opening of Stewie's play, the audience leaves looking super disappointed. Brian is all confused, wondering why Stewie changed his play so much. But we all know the truth. Stewie did it for his buddy Brian. He didn't want to outshine him. And that, folks, is a real friendship moment.
Stewie, you shouldn't have done that. But thanks.
No problem, Brian.
And that's number 7 on our list of Brian's worst moments ever. From lying to his best friend to killing a poor squirrel, Brian really hits rock bottom here. But hey, at least Stewie's there to pick him up and maybe bury him in the backyard if things go south again. Coming in at number 6 on our list of Brian Griffin's worst moments ever is the episode The Heartbreak Dog. This episode is a masterclass in why Brian's relationships are like a train wreck. Except in this case, the train is on fire and somehow driving off a cliff. The episode kicks off with the Griffins being invited to their neighbor Bonnie's 46th birthday party. Now, if you think this is going to be a fun, lighthearted celebration, think again. The drama starts faster than you can say midlife crisis.
Here, we brought you guys an orchid from Trader Joe's because we don't know or care about any of your interests.
But let's not get distracted by Peter's perfect gift-giving skills. Bonnie is dealing with a major rough patch in her relationship with Joe. So naturally, Brian, the dog with the worst relationship advice since Dr. Phil, finds himself in the middle of all this drama. Bonnie, feeling trapped and miserable, spills her woes to Brian, and our genius dog tries to play therapist. And just when you think this conversation might lead to some heartfelt advice, their emotions go haywire. Bam! They share a kiss so intense that it could be the opening scene of a cheap romance novel. One minute they're chatting about life's regrets, and the next they're locking lips like it's the season finale of The Bachelor. After the kiss, they snap back to reality faster than someone realizing they've left their phone at home. The awkwardness thickens in the air, and Brian suddenly remembers that Bonnie is, married to Joe. Oops!
I can't believe I just kissed my friend's wife.
Now, you'd think Brian would keep this colossal blunder to himself, right? But no. This is Brian we're talking about. Instead of staying quiet, he confesses to the absolute worst person he could possibly tell. Peter. Yes, Peter Griffin, the human equivalent of a megaphone with no off switch.
Don't worry. I'm great at keeping secrets.
If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Predictably, Peter's secret-keeping skills are about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. The next thing you know, Joe and Bonnie show up at the Griffins for a game night. Seems innocent enough, right? But in true Family Guy fashion, what starts as a fun game of charades quickly turns into a soap opera disaster. While Bonnie sneaks off to the kitchen for a glass of wine, she runs into Brian and things get awkward fast. It's like watching two teenagers who have a crush on each other but are too embarrassed to admit it, except they're both grown adults and one of them is a dog.
Maybe in another life, huh?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Back in the living room, Peter, because of course it's Peter, decides this is the perfect time to drop the bombshell. He spills the beans about Brian and Bonnie's little incident, and the room goes silent. The game night takes a hard left turn into full-blown scandal territory.
The other night at your party, Brian kissed Bonnie.
What?
Everyone is shocked, and suddenly, the charades game isn't the main event anymore. The night that started with innocent fun is now spiraling into chaos, with Brian and Bonnie's secret affair out in the open. The next morning, Brian, now feeling the weight of his terrible decision, decides it's time to face the music. He heads over to Joe's house to apologize, but Joe isn't in the mood for apologies. Oh no, Joe's got other plans, and they involve taking revenge on Brian in the most petty ways imaginable.
Hey, is that your car?
What? No! What's he doing? My car was parked legally!
Well, maybe your car violated some sort of unspoken boundary.
So Joe gets his petty revenge, and Brian's day goes from bad to worse. But it doesn't stop there. The Griffins, ever the peacemakers, invite Joe and Bonnie over to talk things out and put an end to this madness. What could go wrong? Oh, just about everything. As Joe starts pointing fingers at Brian, the rest of the group starts piling on Bonnie, throwing her under the bus in the most Family Guy way possible.
Oh, Brian's a complete dick, we all know that. But I think we're losing sight of the point that Bonnie's a weird slut who's always letting you know she's open for business.
What?
But just when you think things couldn't get any messier, Brian decides to defend Bonnie like he's the hero of some tragic love story. And because this is Family Guy, things escalate quickly. Next thing you know, Brian and Bonnie are running away together, leaving the Griffin's house behind in the dust. They think they're heading off to start a new life, but they run into a little problem, one that every broke person knows all too well. No money.
Oh, hang on. Looks like we need gas. So, do you have, like, a credit card?
Nope. And no cash either. But I don't care. I couldn't stand another moment with Joe. It was...
Turns out, love doesn't pay the bills. Who knew? Brian and Bonnie quickly discover that their grand escape is more like a bad episode of Survivor, the broke edition. With no cash and nowhere to go, their romantic getaway is turning into a nightmare faster than you can say bad decisions. Desperate for money, the two end up working at a diner. But instead of bonding over their shared struggle, they start bickering like an old married couple. Bonnie complains about everything, from Brian's attitude to the fact that he's a dog trying to flip burgers.
Screw you! You tweet things that aren't worth tweeting!
Well, I'm sorry, but Kim Kardashian did get famous for making a sex tape.
The arguments keep escalating until it's clear that their great romantic escape was a complete failure. Bonnie is frustrated, Brian's exhausted, and both of them realize that they're in way over their heads. Their dream of starting a new life together crumbles faster than the greasy diner fries they're serving. Finally, reality sets in, and the so-called romance falls apart. It's like watching a balloon deflate. Slow, sad, and slightly embarrassing. They've gone from forbidden lovers on the run to two people who can't even stand being in the same room. But just as it seems like things couldn't get worse, who shows up but Joe, Bonnie's husband, ready to take her back? Joe, in a moment of surprising sincerity, apologizes for taking her for granted and asks her to come home.
But I'm here to fight for you, Bonnie. And if you're willing to come back home, I promise I'll spend the rest of my days taking care of you, just the way you've always taken care of me.
Brian, realizing his romantic escapade has gone down in flames, is left to watch as Bonnie returns to Joe. It's a classic case of nice try, but better luck next time. Joe takes Bonnie back and they drive off into the sunset, or, back to their regular, boring life. Brian, on the other hand, is left to lick his wounds, realizing that once again, his attempts at love have ended in complete disaster. And that, dear viewers, is why Brian Griffin's love life is one of the most tragic and cringeworthy sagas in Family Guy history. In the end, Brian is back to square one, and the lesson learned? Maybe sticking to your own species is a good idea. But hey, what would Family Guy be without a little drama, a lot of bad decisions, and Brian Griffin proving, once again, that he's his own worst enemy? At number 5, we've got the episode Brian Writes a Bestseller. And boy, does that title set you up for some serious disappointment. We kick off with Brian getting a package. What's inside? Well, it's his own book. The one nobody wanted to buy. And, just to twist the knife, his publisher sent a note saying they're returning all the unsold copies. And guess what? That's every single one of them.
You guys got a garage or something? We got like 300 boxes of these things.
So Brian's hit rock bottom, like he's face first in the dirt. He tells Stewie he's done with writing, like forever. But here's the thing, Brian's still super salty about his book tanking, and he can't stop trash talking all the bestsellers out there. Like those books that people actually want to read. So Stewie, being the little devil he is, dares Brian to write a book that's just as trashy. And of course, Brian takes the bait. Because why not?
No, I mean it. I could do it in 3 hours and idiots everywhere would buy it.
Well, why don't you?
And so, in a record-breaking 3 hours and 27 minutes, Brian churns out what he calls a book. It's titled Wish It, Want It, Do It, and honestly, it's 200 pages of pure nonsense. But here's the kicker. Stewie's got a friend in publishing who can get it printed. Yep, because every baby has a publisher buddy on speed dial, right? Totally believable.
Brian, they're publishing your book! You're kidding. I can't believe it. That's the worst thing I've ever written. Not according to Penguin Publishing.
And just like that, Brian becomes a published author. Everyone in town suddenly starts acting like he's the next Hemingway. Even Stewie jumps on board as Brian's publicist, which honestly is a match made in heaven. Stewie's basically born to boss people around.
Excuse me, there's something on the wall. Now, you have exactly 20 seconds to find us a room with a white sofa, a white table, white hydrangeas, and Fiji water!
But, surprise, surprise, fame goes straight to Brian's head. And I mean straight to his head like a rocket. He starts acting like he's some kind of literary genius, even downplaying all the hard work Stewie's done, which is pretty rich coming from a guy who wrote a book in the time it takes to binge watch a Netflix series.
God, Stewie, I used to think that John Lennon was kind of a jerk for saying the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. But now, it's like, I'm not saying I am, but I get it.
And then comes the cringe fest of all cringe fests. A book signing where Brian's ego is on full display. But wait, there's more. After this disaster, we head to a dinner that's supposed to be a celebration. But of course, Brian manages to ruin that too by bragging nonstop about his success. Just when you think it can't get worse, guess who shows up at the restaurant? None other than Renee Zellweger. And Brian? He absolutely loses it.
How do you think I feel walking out of the back room of a restaurant and seeing Renee Zellweger eating in the front room of that restaurant? I am mortified. Absolutely mortified. You should...
And in true Brian fashion, he abandons Stewie faster than you can say, overhyped author. Stewie's left behind looking like a lost puppy, while Brian's busy worrying about sitting in the fancy part of the restaurant. What a guy, right? Meanwhile, back at home, even Stewie can't believe what a monster he's created. Honestly, it's like Frankenstein, but with more pretentiousness.
Dear God, he's become a monster!
But the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday, Stewie lands Brian a spot on Real Time with Bill Maher. This should be Brian's moment to shine, right? Nope! When they arrive, they find out the panel has been swapped and all the research Brian did, completely useless. And just like that, Brian throws a temper tantrum worthy of a reality TV star and fires Stewie on the spot. Way to keep it classy, Brian.
I am done with you! Do you hear me? Done! Get out of here now! Brian, please! You're fired!
Then comes the grand finale, a 5-minute dumpster fire on live TV that can only be described as Trainwreck TV at its finest. Brian is so out of his depth that he ends up literally peeing himself in front of the entire country. Yep, that's how bad it gets, folks.
Look, just tell me what you want me to say.
Bill, he's urinating.
That's it.
After this absolute meltdown, you'd think Brian would be humbled, right? Wrong. Instead of a sincere apology, Brian tries to blame everything on Stewie. Because, of course, nothing's ever Brian's fault.
This all happened so fast, and I lost sight of who I was. Sure, you were in a little over your head, but...
In the end, Brian's apology is so half-hearted, it's almost painful to watch. Even Stewie can't take it seriously. Realizing this is as good as it's gonna get, Stewie gives Brian the only piece of advice he really needs.
That's as good as it's gonna get, isn't it?
Pretty much.
You can't write.
Our fourth worst moment kicks off with Brian doing what he does best, making terrible decisions. This time he decided to join Twitter because apparently the world really needed more of his opinions. And I can already see this going bad.
If you ask me, Twitter is the perfect place for that guy, because he's a twit.
So, what does Brian do? He posts an off-color tweet that he thinks is edgy and clever, but really it's just plain offensive. We're talking about a tweet so bad, it makes the entire town of Quahog turn against him faster than you can say delete. The tweet goes viral for all the wrong reasons, and suddenly, Brian's the most hated dog in town.
Brian, the family has spoken.
The Griffins, now facing the wrath of the entire town, have to make a tough decision. Brian has to go. And where does he end up? In a shabby apartment on the other side of town, where the wallpaper peels off by itself and the smell of old takeout is just part of the ambiance. Rent's due, bills are piling up, and Brian knows that no one's coming to save him this time.
So, what do you think? Is your family going to give you money for the rent?
Yeah, I'm thinking no.
With no other options and no one to turn to, Brian does something he's clearly not cut out for. He gets a job. And not just any job, Brian ends up working at a suicide hotline. You know, the kind of place where you're supposed to help people in crisis. But let's be real, Brian has about as much empathy as a brick wall.
Suicide hotline.
Hey, I'm a pathetic dog whose family kicked him out, and I want to kill myself.
Stewie?
And of course, his first caller is Stewie. Because if anyone's going to rub salt in Brian's wounds, it's going to be the family baby with a penchant for evil plots. So while Brian's busy botching his first day on the job, let's check in on what's happening back at the Griffin house. Peter, the king of bad ideas, decides to skip out on a visit to Lois's parents because, well, he'd rather sit on the couch and watch TV with his buddies. But in a twist of fate, their DVD player breaks down right when they're about to start their Rocky IV marathon. Not one to let technology stand in his way, Peter and the gang head out to replace it, because heaven forbid they miss their movie night.
Let's just go to the damn store.
Back at the hotline, Brian's day isn't getting any better. After surviving Stewie's prank call, Brian meets his new coworker, Martha. She's smart, she's attractive, and she's definitely not interested in Brian. But that doesn't stop him from trying. Brian awkwardly tries to flirt, offering to take her out for a drink, but Martha isn't having it. She shuts him down so fast, it's like he never even tried. But of course, this is Brian we're talking about. He's not about to give up.
Well, nothing says I can't date her up here.
And what does Brian do next? Oh, just the logical thing. He starts stalking her on Facebook. He digs through her profile like he's on a mission, scrolling through family photos, old posts, and anything else he can find. And when he stumbles across a picture of Martha's mom, well, his thoughts take a turn that's creepy even by Brian's standards.
That's her mom? Damn. I can work with this.
But of course, in true Brian fashion, his creeping doesn't stay a secret for long. Martha catches him in the act scrolling through her private photos like a total weirdo. And let's just say, Martha's not thrilled to find out her coworker is basically a full-blown stalker. If Brian wasn't already the office outcast, he definitely is now.
Oh my god! Gross! You scumbag!
The next day, Martha, probably feeling a little bad for yelling at Brian, decides to apologize. But what she doesn't know is that Brian, in a moment of sheer desperation and stupidity, decided to take some advice from his landlord. His brilliant idea, planting cocaine in Martha's desk to get back at her. Yeah, because that's totally a rational response.
You're gonna have to come with us. And Jeff, you might want to call your sponsor.
You did this, didn't you? I knew you were a little twerp as soon as I met you. He did this! He planted that!
Martha, I'm so sorry.
You bastard!
And that's why this episode lands at number 4 on our list of Brian's worst moments. In just a few short days, Brian manages to ruin his reputation, creep out his coworkers, and land himself in more trouble than ever before. By the end of it, he's jobless, friendless, and pretty much the last dog anyone would want around. But hey, at least he's consistent. Alright folks, we're diving headfirst into Brian's third worst moment, and oh boy does he put the woof in the woof of Wall Street. It all begins with Brian walking into Stewie's room, only to find it filled with coin-operated horses. And guess what? Stewie's riding the unicorn one, because of course he is. Classic Stewie.
I assume you're on the unicorn?
You know me well, sir.
Brian, in complete shock, can't believe Stewie has somehow managed to afford all this. So naturally, he asks Stewie where the heck he got the money. After some classic Stewie stalling, the truth finally comes out. Stewie's been investing in the stock market. Yep, that's right, our diaper-wearing evil genius is now a stock market guru.
Well, I'll tell you, but only on one condition.
Fine, never mind then.
Investing! I invest in the stock market.
Fast forward a bit, and Brian and Stewie manage to smash their car into another one, all thanks to Brian's wonderful driving skills. But instead of handling it like a decent dog, Brian decides to show off his arcist side. Because why not? if there's traffic involved, apparently it's okay.
Oh, great. Course it's one of them. What? Stewie, adults are allowed to say racist things because of traffic.
Sure, Brian, we totally believe you. Instead of doing the responsible thing, they drive away from the scene, showing us just how much Brian respects the law. Later on, when Brian starts whining about how fixing the car will bankrupt him, Stewie swoops in with a brilliant idea. Give him $100 to invest in the stock market. You know, because that's totally going to fix everything.
Tell you what, give me $100 to put in the stock market, and I'll take care of it.
The market?
Brian, you won't lose your money, I promise.
Time passes and Stewie approaches Brian with some news about that investment. Now, Brian's been waiting for this moment to scream, "I told you so." But his plan backfires when Stewie reveals that he actually doubled the money. Brian goes from smug to begging real quick, asking Stewie to teach him the ways of the stock market. But of course, Stewie's got conditions. He wants Brian to teach him gymkata, whatever that is.
Okay, but I can see this is going to be a lot of work. So in return, you must teach me gymkata, the fusion of gymnastics and karate.
No. What follows is a hilariously confusing yet epic gymkata fight sequence that somehow makes Brian even more obsessed with the stock market. Soon enough, he's hooked, thinking he's about to become the next big Wall Street tycoon.
Are you kidding? I've been looking at stocks all morning. I'm already up 5% on the day.
In a brief moment of charity, Brian mentions he'll set aside $1 for cancer research. But who are we kidding? We all know that's not happening.
I'm gonna rent a Ferrari and cruise the pier. You want in?
Well, cancer's not going anywhere.
Next, we find our dynamic duo outside a shady-looking factory, where Brian has been invited to a meeting. The company supposedly guarantees profits, but surprise! It turns out they make protein shakes out of dog meat. Yeah, you read that right. Dog meat.
Just a protein shake, and it's the cheapest on the market.
Brian? I think I know why it's so cheap. They're made of dog meat.
Now, any sane person would turn around and help the poor dogs, but this is Brian we're talking about. Greed takes over, and instead of leaving, he decides to invest in the company. Even when Stewie begs him to snap out of it, Brian fights him off, literally turning into the monster Stewie warns him about.
Oh my god! Brian, you've turned into a monster! Hey!
Predictably, Brian's greed lands him in hot water as he ends up on the assembly line, about to be turned into a protein shake himself. He's forced to call Stewie for help, knowing full well that he's the only one who can save him from this mess.
Hey, don't touch me, I'm rich!
He just makes it so difficult to be on his side.
Stewie eventually comes to the rescue, though not without hesitation. After another intense gymkata fight sequence, they escape the factory, safe and sound. But does Brian learn his lesson? Of course not. He tries to blame the evils of Wall Street for his mistakes, as if that's the real issue here.
Oh, Stewie, I am so sorry I became such a jerk. But I guess I learned my lesson about the evils of Wall Street.
What are you talking about? This isn't about Wall Street. This is about you!
And there you have it, Brian's third worst moment, where his greed, selfishness, and complete lack of moral compass land him in one of the most ridiculous situations ever. But hey, that's just another day in the life of Brian Griffin. At number 2, we have an episode where Brian thinks he's the next big literary genius. It all kicks off with Brian bragging to Lois that his essay won first prize in the New England Writers Contest. And guess what? They're gonna pay for all his expenses. Yeah, Brian's ego is skyrocketing.
Well, that's wonderful, Brian.
But we all know what happens when Brian gets too full of himself. Disaster! Meanwhile, Peter is doing what he does best, ignoring Lois. He's off hanging out with his buddies, probably trying to avoid any form of responsibility like it's the plague. Lois is frustrated because Peter never spends any time with her. Later, Brian and Peter have a little chat about Peter's disappearing act. Lois steps in and lets Brian know that tonight is supposed to be their night. But surprise, surprise, Peter bails again, because why would he want to spend time with his wife when he can do literally anything else? Brian, seeing his chance, suggests that both Peter and Lois should come with him to Martha's Vineyard for a vacation. You know, because nothing says romance like crashing your friend's award ceremony. They all fly out to Martha's Vineyard with Brian, who's secretly hoping this will be the trip that changes everything. Lois and Brian end up sitting at a table together, and wouldn't you know it, Peter is nowhere to be found. Typical. They call Brian up to give his big speech, and everyone claps like he just cured world hunger. And right on cue, Peter stumbles in, completely drunk. He starts a fight with Lois because, well, what else is new? Brian, who thought this trip was going to be his shining moment, is left to pick up the pieces of this mess. The next morning, Brian finds Lois, and they decide to hang out together. Peter's probably off somewhere, still nursing his hangover. Brian and Lois go cycling, enjoy the beautiful scenery, and Brian even gives her a flower. He's laying it on thick, folks. After spending the day together, they head back to the hotel. Brian's mind starts wandering into dangerous territory. He's thinking, maybe tonight's the night. But then, reality hits him like a ton of bricks.
Lois, my darling! Whoa, 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 whoa! What am I doing? This is Lois, Peter's wife.
They decide to watch a movie together, and Brian, being the smooth talker he thinks he is, tells Lois that the essay he wrote was actually about her. He starts showering her with compliments, really trying to set the mood. And then, in true Brian fashion, he makes a move on Lois. But Lois, who is not having any of it, tells Brian to back off and get out. After getting rejected, Brian runs off to spill his guts to Stewie. He admits that he tried to make a move on Lois, and Stewie is just as shocked as we are. What did Brian think was going to happen? Did he expect Lois to leave Peter and run off with him? Classic Brian, always getting himself into trouble. Meanwhile, Lois tells Peter what happened. She drops the bomb that Brian tried to have sex with her, and Peter, in his usual over-the-top fashion, is ready to fight. Because that's obviously the best way to handle things, right? Cut to the local bar where Brian is drowning his sorrows. Peter storms in, and the two of them start brawling like it's an episode of WWE. Punches are thrown, tables are flipped, and by the end of it, they're both a complete mess. Brian, feeling like the world's biggest loser, tries to apologize to Peter. He's sorry, but Peter's not exactly in a forgiving mood. After all, Brian just tried to wreck his marriage, but eventually they both realize they're idiots and decide to call a truce. Brian also apologizes to Lois, who admits something shocking. She's thought about Brian that way too. But don't worry, nothing actually happens because, well, this is still a family show. Sort of. In the number one spot, we have Brian being the backstabbing, selfish dog that he is, showing us just how low he can go for his own profit, even if it means betraying the only person that helped him in the episode, Brian the Closer. Brian's part in this mess starts with him entering the police station to visit Peter. Now, we're just as surprised as you that it took 9 whole seasons for the cops to finally lock up this menace. But here's a quick recap of why Peter's in the slammer. When the local dry cleaner loses Peter's favorite white shirt, he goes ballistic. Not just your typical I'm angry ballistic. No, Peter breaks into the cleaner's house, finds a white shirt in the closet, and then, as luck would have it, the cleaner arrives with a gun. But instead of ruining his precious shirt, the cleaner agrees to fight Peter, and of course Peter gets his butt kicked, leading to his arrest. Just another classic Peter arc, am I right? Now back to Brian, our loved yet punchable at times dog, who finds himself sitting next to a damsel in distress. And we can all guess what he's going to do next. Making small talk, he finds out that she's a Democrat. And boy, this is the cue Brian needs to go off.
Oh, God, is that tonight? I promised Barry I'd be there. I call him Barry. You probably know him as Barack.
When Brian starts lying, you know the sky is the limit. Scouting out a way to shoot his shot, he asks if she's waiting for her boyfriend, but finds out she got arrested for protesting. Bingo. You know, you can call Brian a failure at everything, but when it comes to confidence, he's going to dive right in, and he does it here as well by asking Denise out. And guess what? She actually accepts. Would you look at that? Our favorite dog is going places.
Who knows? Maybe we could get arrested together.
Sure, I'd like that.
A week in a protest later, and Brian is already imagining wedding bells going off. Lois knows what's coming, and she's tired of it, like the rest of us. Brian confides in her that maybe Denise was the person he's always been waiting for. Yeah, like the countless other girls he fumbled, right? Forced into a corner, Brian has to show everyone that she's the one and calls her to ask her out on a date. And well, showing his reaction is way better than just describing it. Fast forward, and we see Brian heartbroken and rip-torn, drinking all by himself. And to be honest, we do feel a little bad for him. When Peter finds out that Brian's having trouble finding the one, he tells him about Quagmire's pickup classes. This shocks Brian, but let's be honest here. If there's one guy in Quahog who can do something like that, it's always going to be Quagmire. Following Peter's advice, Brian decides to enlist Quagmire's help by taking his class on how to pick up girls.
Why don't you take Quagmire's class on picking up chicks?
Quagmire teaches a class?
We jump to Quagmire's class, where he teaches everyone the art of picking up women. But in reality, it's just a course on how to be as creepy and perverted as you can. But hey, if it works for Quagmire, there's surely something special about it. Brian enters the class, and Quagmire's reaction tells us everything we need to know about their relationship.
Brian, what are you doing here?
I'm in your class.
What? No way, I don't want you in here.
Pretty soon, Brian starts dressing up like Quagmire wants them to. And to say he's dressed like a douchebag is an understatement. It's the classic I'm an a-hole look. His final test is to go on a date with Denise, and it does not go anything like you'd expect. Especially after he sends her something on her phone that we don't think anyone would like to imagine.
Oh my God, is that your...
Yeah, how'd you like to get hit in the face with that?
This has to be a new record in the fastest way to ruin a date, and Brian excels at it. He treats Denise like trash, and she ends up leaving Brian, good for her. Brian's surprised that acting like a typical jerk didn't make her want him more, asks her to wait, but I'm afraid that ship has sailed, buddy. When Quagmire's technique makes things even worse for Brian with Denise, Quagmire admits his style is only to get laid, not build a relationship.
These skills aren't for women you care about, you idiot. This course is in getting laid, not finding love.
Glenn then educates Brian on the perils of love. He explains how everyone has that special woman they'll never get, just like his own love, Cheryl Tiggs. We cut away to a section about Glenn's love escapades with Cheryl, which only end up in a dumpster fire as his jealousy takes over and he ends up dumping her when she talks to John Davidson, who looks like he came straight out of a nightmare.
Wow, did you just break up with Cheryl Tiggs?
I sure did.
Pissed off at Glenn's condescending tone from his high horse, Brian decides to get his revenge. What he does next is straight up scummy, but we have to admit, the dog has balls of steel for messing with Glenn like that. Quagmire opens his door to find Cheryl standing right there in person. She's visiting him with her new boyfriend, and if you couldn't tell already, it's Brian. Brian takes Quagmire's style and manages to pick up Quagmire's lost love, Cheryl Tiggs, forcing Quagmire to watch helplessly as Brian treats her like crap. This just goes to show what a scumbag Brian can be if he puts his mind to it. Or, as Glenn puts it,
"You dirty bastard! I always knew you were low, but you're nothing more than a backstabbing junkyard cur!"
Out for dinner with Cheryl, things get nasty when Quagmire arrives with Jillian. Brian discovers that Quagmire took advantage of Jillian's lack of intelligence to pick her up, and soon Brian and Quagmire start trading insults, resulting in both of the girls leaving them alone. Outside the restaurant, Brian encounters Quagmire waiting for his car. Quagmire admits to only picking up Jillian to irritate Brian, and Brian admits his feeling that he and Cheryl were likely not going to be a successful relationship either. But hey, there's always a silver lining, and this whole fiasco may be the point where they finally become good friends again.
So, would you mind giving me a lift home, buddy?
Or not.